Today's episode is about an introduction to the epistemology of storytelling. The 101 course people learn in their doctoral program. I decided that before people can understand existentialism and of Heidegger and Sartre, Camus, and many others, they need to understand phenomenology. But then I decided I need to start where people are, and it's probably with what is knowledge and what is the study of knowledge, or the field of epistemology. What is the theory of knowledge? How do we know what we know? What if we don't know what we think we know? What if we believe things that aren't true? What if we have facts and those facts aren't based on reality? So today I'm going to ask you, is this a pen, or is this one my father made, a pen? Now, the difference is this is a kit pen that's turned on a lathe, and this is a pen of my own design, a mesquite pen. If we measure them, we can see that the pen I made is a little bit thinner than the one my dad made. Does that make mine a pen? This one's not a pen? Well, the kit pens, thousands of pen makers turn them on lathes, but the mesquite pens, not so much, because it takes some artistic creativity. You see, it doesn't come right to a linear point. There's a bump here that I like to hold on to. It has a screw-on cap to secure the pen cartridge itself. And it's a really good pen, by the way. It'll write underwater. This pen here will run out of ink very, very quickly. This one you can easily pull it apart, pop in a new pen, and you're writing. Now, what's the definition of epistemology? It comes from the Greek episteme and the Greek word ology. And episteme just means knowledge or knowing, how we know things. Ology means the study of, so the study of how we know. So the questions, what is the nature of knowledge? What are the obstacles to knowledge itself? What can be known or unknown about pen making in our example today? And how do we know it's a pen? You're watching a film of a pen. This is not the actual pen. This is a film of a pen and my dad's pen, the two pens, right? Now, is this a pen? Well, it turns out this one's a little bent for making a pen out of it, but I actually see a future of a pen in this piece here, etc. But we're going to keep it simple today and just do an introduction to pen making so I can make some points about epistemology. Okay, so as I'm producing the pen here, I want to talk to you about epistemology. I just tapped the end of it. I'm putting on the pen mandrel now, so I got a technology I use for making the pen. I'm at the lathe now, setting it up, getting it all squared away. Now that's spinning, I use a horseshoe file, and this allows me to shape the hardwood. Mesquite is very, very hard. I know this from sense making. I know this from my rational study. So this is epistemological storytelling. You see me here in action making the pen. Now I got it shaped down pretty good here. I'm speeding it up, so it actually takes a few more hours than what I'm showing you here, but you know, you get the idea that I'm making the pen on the lathe here. It's handwork, it's sense making, but it's also thinking through the design of the pen as I'm making the pen. So it's both sense making and what we call thinkment, thinking things through. So I have the design of the pen coming out. It's epistemological storytelling. It's also other kinds of phenomenal sense making, but which you're going to get to in future episodes. But now I'm just looking at the epistemology, which is the knowledge, the study of the knowledge here. So I worked it out here, how to hold the sandpaper without burning myself. If you hold it in one place and you hold your fingers too close, you are going to burn your fingers. I apply a little oil now and then, sandpaper it, check it all out, get it to the part where I like. I have to take the nub off the end here. This is the end in which the ballpoint pen will go through, extrude through there. And I know from experience just how much pressure to apply on that sanding machine here. Pulled the mandrel out and taking the ballpoint, shoving it through, and it fits out the end just fine. It looks like a good pen. There's no splits in it. I'm going to dress up a kind of a bolt made out of mesquite to stick in the end of it, and this will allow me to have a stop for the ballpoint. Here you can see I'm grinding it down, and then eventually it'll be ready to tap and die. I'm going to tap it, put some threads on the end of it, and I'm getting ready to take it over once that's through back to the bandsaw, and I'm going to cut that end off, being very careful not to cut anything else off. You have to be really careful about bandsaws. My dad always told me, you got to be careful around the bandsaws. That screws in really tightly, just right, not too tightly, or it'll split the wood. And then I've got the pen. I'm just sort of dressing this up so it'll stand up straight, and just dressing up the end so that I can test it now, and it does right. And there I go, scribbling in my notebook with my new pen. I'm going to make a holder so I can stand up the new pen that's made of mesquite wood in a base, so I can stick that on my table when I'm writing, or in my exercise machine. Sometimes I'm writing there, and there it goes. It stands right up there, and that's the. And this was particularly hard for me because I've been moving away from epistemology my whole life. And but I think it's like starting back at the basics, and also recognizing the field of epistemology has changed radically over the last decade. And I didn't get into all of that in the video, but I wanted to kind of announce that the relevance for in Thinkman's circle is that we know things by our sense making, our sensory, the five senses, right? We can touch them, smell them, taste them, hear them, see them, that whole thing. But it turns out that our senses are not very reliable, so that the knowledge we get from our senses probably not all that accurate. And that means that our belief about what our senses have shown us can vary from person to person. I mean, our sense-making experience can be quite different. Now, in empiricism, which is part of epistemology, the study of facts, as Sabine was just talking about facts, we can use facts, lab studies, other kind of studies of sense-making, and see if people are convergent or not convergent on their sense making. But even if they converge, it doesn't mean that what they think they see, they actually see or hear or taste or smell, etc. The second facet of epistemology, and I'll give a definition of epistemology in the film, but I'll get to that in a second. But the second facet of it is how we think. So that brings us into Thinkman. Now that there's a history of that, Descartes, I think, therefore I am, and he was skeptical of the sensory for reasons I just mentioned, but he also wanted to get toward a more split understanding, Cartesian split between objective, subjective, and all that. I'm not going to go there because that's way over everybody's head that's in the general audience, not over your head, but in the general audience. Now, let's just get back to what is epistemology. Well, it comes from the Greek word episteme and the Greek word ology. And episteme just means knowledge or knowing, how we know things. Ology means the study of. So the study of how we know, the study of knowing. And that's it. That's all it means. And then there's been 2,500 years of debate over what is epistemology and what it's not. Epistemology is a theory of knowledge. It includes the methods to validate knowledge, to determine when knowledge is reliable, the justification of knowledge and beliefs about knowledge. So, simple examples, we believe that COVID masks help us to restrict the spread of COVID, either by ourselves or from others. But there are people that believe that they don't need to wear a mask on an airline, plane, or in a restaurant, or in a gathering at a sports game, and that it makes either they don't care about other human beings, or that it makes no difference, or they have some other interesting belief system why they won't wear a mask. I wear a mask when I'm out, and I suggest people do too. Now, if we look at epistemology and the facts about such things as masks, and if we look at the empirical studies, there's a breakdown between the empirical work and people's belief about masks will vary significantly from their practices will vary from the scientific recommendations of doctors and researchers, etc. So let's talk about any other setup I might need to give you. But that gives you some of the idea of epistemology, the study of knowledge, okay? Now you take phenomenology, which is not the subject of my current video, by the way, but you can't get away from phenomenology. It's not completely divorced from epistemology, but let's just look at a couple of trends. The first kind of phenomenology that's most famous is Edmund Husserl, who had bracketing. We bracket our sense making, we bracket our thinking, we bracket in order to enter a pure consciousness. Whether you believe in that or not, obviously Heidegger did not believe in it, so he developed a phenomenology called hermeneutics, which is kind of the study of the process of how we derive meaning from being in the world. That would be my short definition of it. So Heidegger, as a student of Husserl, deviated from Husserl because he didn't want to restrict himself to consciousness, the study of consciousness. He wanted to understand time and being in the world. And he didn't want to accept Immanuel Kant's definition that time and space are already there, so don't worry about it. You know, he wanted to understand the meaning of space and time and its variabilities. So he separated from Husserl. So that gives you two types of phenomenology. Now there's a third type of phenomenology very popular in management studies, and it's what is the interpretation of the phenomenon itself. And that gets us into social construction, reflexivity, ideographic focus on how we can attain generalizations about phenomenon. So it's it bridges more closely to epistemology than either Husserl or Heidegger. A fourth type of phenomenology is narrative phenomenology. And I'm giving you all of these because I want to do a video on each one. Getting up to narrative phenomenology, most people would cite Paul Ricoeur, and Narrative in Time, I believe is the name of the classic book. And in that book is a chapter on emplotment of narrative. And I also talk about my 2001 book on narrative methods quite extensively, but just to be very brief, we have plots, and then we have all the stuff that goes into creating plots, like language and symbols and agreement on what we're talking about and agreement on context and all that necessary to construct a plot. And then after the plot, it gets rehistoricized and regrouped and reimagined and reinterpreted. And then we loop around, if you like, a circular hermeneutics. And he uses the term hermeneutics, so it relates, not all of these are independent. It relates back to Heidegger again with the hermeneutic circle. I prefer hermeneutic spiral, but that would be something I'm going to save for later on. Let me give you the fifth and final one that I'm going to look at. There could be more types of phenomenology, but one is ethnography. There's a branch called ethnographic phenomenology, or phenomenology ethnography, however you want to put it. And this is to look at participation in worlds of phenomenon with participants, and interacting with those participants to grasp the cultural background. I used to teach ethnography to anthropologists, and there's cultural codes that when you do an ethnography, you look up the cultural codes of particular cultures and geographic or historical situations, and you understand the background. And you can combine a little bit of hermeneutics with ethnography and participant observation and look at the structure of the life world. Life world concept, Husserl, I believe, made very famous. So again, some of these elements drift back and forth in the 5 kinds of phenomenology. So just to review: transcendental phenomenology of Husserl, more existential phenomenology of Heidegger than Sartre, Camus, de Boje, and Kierkegaard and Dostoevsky. And those are all different, by the way. And then you have interpretive phenomenology, which takes a much more grounded approach and looking at generalizations and that sort of thing. And then you have narrative phenomenology, best typified by Paul Ricoeur. And then you have ethnography of the phenomenon itself, and I would vote John Van Manen. John Van Manen is a very, very knowledgeable and experienced ethnographer, and somebody I've worked with over the years, and was fortunate to do a big session at the Academy. In fact, it's the last ballroom session I did, and maybe we'll ever do. Okay, so that's what I'm doing. I'm going back to what is the theory of knowledge? How do we know what we know? What if we don't know what we think we know? What if we believe things that aren't true? What if we have facts and those facts aren't based on reality? What if the facts and the reality are not what we believe? All of those things fall under the notion of epistemology. And then there were the 2 types of epistemology, the ones from the sense making, which is very popular with Carl Weichians. Carl Weich, again, a good mentor over the years, very popular to base your empiricism on sense making and not on thinking. Thus, the term is in the book Ronnie and I did, the phrase, enactment of the sense-making, not enthinkment. Enactment, not enthinkment. Here we look at enthinkment because we want to understand the ways of thinking that develop by sorting things through and questioning our sense-making and getting into more oh, rigorous, I would say, and sort of sorting them out with other people and getting it sort of figured out, a plan of enthink that contradicts or counters the prevailing logic.